Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving headfirst into the glorious shit show that was Donald Trump's first 24 hours in office. It was a day that set the tone for an administration like no other, filled with chaos, controversy, and a whole lot of executive orders. You know, that period where most presidents are still figuring out where the bathrooms are? Usually it's a time for settling in, meeting key staff, and maybe even taking a moment to soak in the gravity of the office. Yeah, well, not this guy. Trump had no time for such trivialities. He was on a mission, and that mission was to make his mark as quickly and as loudly as possible. He hit the ground running, like a toddler who found a loaded gun and a Red Bull. It was as if he had been waiting his whole life for this moment and wasn't going to waste a single second. We're talking about the man who, upon grabbing the presidential Sharpie, because you know he calls it that, decided to immediately start scribbling his name on anything that wasn't nailed down. And he did it with a flair that only Trump could muster. And by anything, I mean executive orders. He signed a flurry of them, each one more controversial than the last. Now, executive orders aren't inherently evil. In fact, they can be quite useful. They're tools presidents can use to bypass Congress and get things done. They can be used to address urgent issues, or to implement policies that have been stalled in the legislative process. But in Trump's tiny, Cheeto-dusted hands, they became weapons of mass disruption, aimed squarely at anything resembling Obama's legacy. It was clear from the get-go that Trump was on a mission to dismantle as much of the previous administration's work as possible. So buckle up as we dissect the most impactful executive orders from Trump's day one, because these weren't just any orders. They were statements of intent, declarations of war on the status quo. Because frankly, understanding this chaotic mess might be the only way to survive the next 4 years. It's going to be a wild ride, and knowledge is our best defense. Just kidding, there's no surviving this. But at least we can try to make sense of it all. But at least we'll be informed while the world burns, right? So grab your popcorn, sit back, and let's dive into the madness that was Trump's first day in office. Let's kick things off with an executive order that, much like Trump's hair in a hurricane, immediately sent shockwaves across the nation and the world. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill let's streamline visa applications type of order. Oh no, this was classic Trump, opting for the subtle approach of a sledgehammer to a Fabergé egg. The order, officially titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, catchy, right? Was immediately dubbed the Muslim ban by, well, everyone. And while Trump and his cronies insisted it wasn't about religion, the fact that it targeted 7 Muslim-majority countries felt a tad on the nose, wouldn't you say? This wasn't just some abstract policy change, it had real, immediate consequences. People with valid visas, green card holders, even Iraqi interpreters who risked their lives alongside U.S. troops, were suddenly detained at airports, barred from entering the country they called home. It was chaos, it was cruel, it was, dare I say, un-American. And it was just the tip of the iceberg of what would become 4 years of relentless attacks on immigrants. Imagine this. You've packed your bags, said goodbye to loved ones, and endured a grueling international flight, only to land in America, the land of the free, and be greeted not with open arms, but with armed guards, and a one-way ticket back to where you came from. That was the reality for countless individuals caught in the crosshairs of Trump's immigration ban. Families were separated, students were denied entry to universities, and professionals with job offers were left stranded, unsure of what their future held. The scenes at airports across the country were straight out of a dystopian novel. Lawyers camped out at arrival gates, desperately trying to help those detained, while protesters chanted slogans and waved signs that read, "No ban, no wall, this is not who we are." It was a powerful display of resistance, a testament to the fact that even in the face of such blatant bigotry, the American spirit of compassion and empathy was alive and well. But for those caught in the system, the fight was far from over. Now, you might think that an executive order as blatantly discriminatory as this wouldn't stand a chance in a court of law, and you'd be right. The ACLU and other civil rights organizations immediately filed lawsuits, arguing that the ban violated the Constitution's guarantee of religious freedom. The legal battle raged on, with lower courts blocking the ban, only to have it reinstated by higher courts, like a legal game of ping pong played with the lives of thousands of people. Eventually, after much legal wrangling, a watered-down version of the ban was allowed to go into effect, but the damage was done. The message was clear. America, under the Trump administration, was closing its doors to the world, particularly to those from Muslim-majority countries. It was a dark chapter in American history, one that would have lasting consequences on the country's reputation and its relationship with the Muslim world. Behind the headlines and the political posturing were real people whose lives were turned upside down by this executive order. Families were torn apart, with loved ones separated by borders they were now forbidden to cross. Students who had dreamed of studying in America saw their aspirations dashed, their futures thrown into uncertainty. Professionals who had built careers and lives in the U.S. were forced to make impossible choices, abandon their dreams or be separated from their families. The human cost of Trump's Muslim ban cannot be overstated. It was a policy driven by fear and prejudice, and its impact on individuals, families, and communities was nothing short of devastating. While the initial chaos of the Muslim ban eventually subsided, its impact on U.S. immigration policy was profound and long-lasting. The Trump administration used this executive order as a springboard to implement a series of increasingly restrictive immigration measures. From the separation of families at the border to the reduction of refugee admissions to historic lows, Trump's anti-immigrant agenda touched every aspect of the immigration system. The message was clear: America was no longer a welcoming place for immigrants. This shift in policy had a chilling effect on legal immigration, as people around the world began to view the U.S. as hostile and unwelcoming. The Trump administration's actions tarnished America's image as a nation of immigrants and undermined its moral authority on the world stage. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Trump's Muslim ban is the climate of fear and division it created. By singling out Muslims and painting them as a threat, Trump fueled anti-Muslim sentiment and emboldened Islamophobia across the country. This rhetoric had real-world consequences, leading to an increase in hate crimes against Muslims and other minority groups. The ban also served to further divide Americans along political lines, with those who supported it cheering on Trump's hardline stance and those who opposed it decrying it as discriminatory and un-American. The Muslim ban was a defining moment in Trump's presidency, revealing his administration's willingness to prioritize political expediency over basic human decency. It was a stark reminder that the fight for a more just and equitable immigration system is far from over. Fresh off the heels of his immigration ban, you'd think Trump might take a breather, maybe a nap in a tanning bed. But no, he was just getting warmed up. His next target? The Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. Now you might remember Obamacare from such hits as Republicans trying to repeal it 70 times and actually providing health care to millions of Americans. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Naturally, Trump, being a man of subtlety and nuance, I'm kidding, he thinks those are spices, decided to take a sledgehammer to this particular legislative Jenga tower too. His weapon of choice? Another executive order, because why bother with pesky things like congressional approval or a coherent plan when you can just sign something and declare victory? The executive order, grandiosely titled Minimizing the Economic Burden of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act Pending Repeal, was a masterpiece of Orwellian doublespeak. It basically instructed federal agencies to do whatever they could to undermine Obamacare without actually repealing it. Think of it as death by 1,000 cuts, except the cuts were to healthcare coverage, and the death was metaphorical, unless you were one of the millions of Americans who rely on Obamacare for their health insurance, in which case, the death was very real. The order targeted things like the individual mandate, which required most Americans to have health insurance or pay a penalty. This, of course, was the backbone of Obamacare, ensuring that healthy people were in the risk pool to offset the costs of those with pre-existing conditions. But Trump, in his infinite wisdom, decided that dismantling this key provision was a good idea because, who needs affordable healthcare when you can have tax cuts for billionaires? Now, you might be thinking, John, this all sounds incredibly complicated and confusing. And to that I say, you're absolutely right. Even healthcare experts were left scratching their heads trying to decipher the implications of Trump's executive order. The only thing that was clear was that it would create chaos in the healthcare market. Insurers, facing uncertainty about the future of Obamacare, started raising premiums or pulling out of the individual market altogether. This left millions of Americans, particularly those in rural areas, with fewer choices and skyrocketing costs. But hey, at least the wealthy got their tax cuts, right? Behind the policy jargon and political maneuvering were real people whose lives were directly impacted by Trump's assault on Obamacare. People like Jessica, a single mother from Ohio with a pre-existing condition, who relied on Obamacare for affordable health insurance. After Trump's executive order, Jessica's premiums skyrocketed, making it impossible for her to afford coverage. Without health insurance, she was forced to delay essential medical care, putting her health at risk. Jessica's story is just one of millions. Trump's efforts to undermine Obamacare had a devastating impact on countless Americans, leaving them vulnerable and without access to affordable health care. Trump's attack on Obamacare didn't end with his Day One executive order. It was just the opening salvo in a relentless campaign to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. He continued to chip away at the law through administrative actions, regulatory changes, and attempts to repeal it in Congress. While he ultimately failed to fully repeal Obamacare, his efforts succeeded in weakening the law and making healthcare less affordable and accessible for millions of Americans. The battle over healthcare continues to this day, with the future of the Affordable Care Act hanging in the balance. Trump campaigned on a promise to repeal and replace Obamacare with something better, cheaper, and more beautiful. But his actions told a different story. Instead of offering a viable alternative, he focused on undermining the existing healthcare system, leaving millions of Americans in a state of uncertainty and fear. His Day One executive order on healthcare was a clear indication of his priorities: to appease his base and reward his wealthy donors, even if it meant jeopardizing the health and well-being of millions of Americans. Alright, strap in folks, because this next executive order is a real humdinger. We're talking about the environment, or as Trump probably calls it, that big green thing outside that blocks the view from his golf courses. On his first day in office, amongst the flurry of signing ceremonies likely fueled by a terrifying cocktail of Diet Coke and Adderall, Trump put pen to paper on an executive order that could only be described as a love letter to the fossil fuel industry. And by love letter, I mean a drunken, rambling text message sent at 3 a.m. that says, "You up? Let's burn some coal, baby." This executive order was basically the bureaucratic equivalent of throwing a lit match into the EPA library and then wondering why the fire alarm was going off. One of the biggest casualties of this environmental blitzkrieg was the Clean Power Plan, an Obama-era initiative aimed at reducing carbon emissions from power plants. The Clean Power Plan was a landmark policy, representing a significant step forward in the fight against climate change. It set ambitious targets for states to cut their greenhouse gas emissions and encourage the adoption of renewable energy sources like wind and solar. This plan, which Trump himself once called a very expensive hoax, was met with fierce opposition from the fossil fuel industry and its allies. They argued that the regulations were too stringent and would lead to higher energy costs for consumers. The Clean Power Plan was designed to combat climate change, a very real and very pressing issue that, shockingly, does not care about your political affiliation. The science is clear. Rising global temperatures are causing more frequent and severe weather events, melting polar ice caps, and rising sea levels. These changes are already having devastating impacts on communities around the world, from coastal cities facing increased flooding to farmers dealing with prolonged droughts. It's a crisis that demands urgent action, and the Clean Power Plan was a crucial part of the solution. Now I know what you're thinking, John. You beautiful, eloquent bastard. Surely even Trump wouldn't just completely gut a plan designed to protect our planet? Well, my dear viewer, the reality is far more disheartening. The Trump administration not only rolled back the Clean Power Plan but also took numerous other steps to dismantle environmental regulations. This included weakening protections for air and water quality and opening up public lands to fossil fuel extraction. And to that I say, oh sweet summer child, you clearly haven't been paying attention. The administration's actions were a stark reminder of how quickly progress can be undone. The Trump administration argued that the Clean Power Plan was bad for the economy and cost jobs. They claimed that the regulations would lead to the closure of coal plants and the loss of thousands of jobs in the coal industry. While it's true that transitioning to cleaner energy sources would require some adjustments, the long-term benefits far outweigh any short-term costs. Investing in renewable energy creates new jobs and stimulates economic growth. Now, while it's true that transitioning to cleaner energy sources would require some adjustments, the long-term benefits far outweigh any short-term costs. Think of it like this. You wouldn't keep smoking cigarettes just because you enjoy the temporary buzz and are worried about the economic impact on big tobacco, would you? The shift to renewable energy is not just about protecting the environment, it's also about creating a sustainable future for generations to come. Clean energy sources like wind and solar are becoming increasingly cost-competitive with fossil fuels, and they offer a path to energy independence and security. Think of it like this. You wouldn't keep smoking cigarettes just because you enjoy the temporary buzz and are worried about the economic impact on big tobacco, would you? Well, unless you're a character in a 1950s cigarette ad, the answer is probably no. The same logic applies to our energy choices. We need to prioritize long-term health and sustainability over short-term profits. The answer is probably no. The same logic applies to our energy choices. We need to prioritize long-term health and sustainability over short-term profits. The Clean Power Plan was a step in the right direction, and its dismantling is a setback we can ill afford. The answer is probably no. The same logic applies to our energy choices. We need to prioritize long-term health and sustainability over short-term profits. The Clean Power Plan was a step in the right direction, and its dismantling is a setback we can ill afford. But the fight for a cleaner, healthier planet continues, and it's up to all of us to keep pushing for progress. But wait, there's more. Just when you thought the environment was safe, think again. The latest executive order has thrown a wrench into the works. This executive order also targeted the Waters of the United States rule, which was designed to protect, well, the waters of the United States. This rule was a cornerstone of environmental protection, ensuring that our rivers, lakes, and streams remain clean and safe for everyone. I know it's almost as if they name these things in the most straightforward way possible. But don't let the simplicity fool you. The implications are far-reaching and complex. This rule, which had been a thorn in the side of developers and agricultural interests, placed limits on the pollution of smaller waterways, like streams and wetlands. These smaller bodies of water are crucial for maintaining the overall health of our ecosystem. Why? Because, and this might blow your mind, those smaller waterways actually flow into bigger waterways, which eventually provide drinking water for millions of people. It's a delicate balance that, if disrupted, can have catastrophic consequences. Trump, however, saw this rule as yet another example of government overreach, a classic case of Washington bureaucrats telling hard-working Americans what they can and can't do with their own water. He argued that it stifled economic growth and placed unnecessary burdens on businesses. Never mind the fact that their own water could end up being your own drinking water further downstream. The interconnectedness of our water systems means that pollution in one area can quickly spread to others, affecting countless communities. So, with the stroke of a pen, Trump essentially gave polluters a free pass to dump whatever they wanted into our waterways, undoing years of progress in environmental protection. This decision has far-reaching implications for public health and the environment, because apparently, nothing says making America great again, quite like toxic sludge and mass fish die-offs. The long-term effects of this policy change are yet to be fully understood, but one thing is clear. Our water and our future are at risk. And if you thought the environmental carnage would stop there, well, you clearly haven't been paying attention to literally any segment we've done about the Trump administration. This executive order also opened up vast swaths of public lands and waters to oil and gas drilling because nothing says conserving our natural resources for future generations like turning them into a giant polluting free-for-all. Now, in the interest of fairness, I should point out that this executive order did include one concession to environmental protection. It blocked oil drilling off the coast of Mar-a-Lago, Trump's own private club in Florida. Apparently, the potential for oil spills and damage to the pristine beaches frequented by wealthy patrons was a bridge too far, even for Trump. It seems the environment is only worth protecting when it directly benefits him and his rich friends. But perhaps the most globally significant aspect of Trump's environmental agenda was his decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, a landmark international accord aimed at combating climate change. This agreement, signed by nearly 200 countries, was the culmination of years of negotiations and represented a rare moment of global unity on a critical issue. Trump, however, dismissed the agreement as a bad deal for the United States, claiming it would cost American jobs and harm the economy. Never mind the fact that the agreement was entirely voluntary and that many of the world's leading businesses actually supported it. This decision to abandon the Paris Agreement sent shockwaves around the world, isolating the United States and undermining its credibility on the global stage. It was a move that prioritized short-term economic gains over the long-term health of our planet, a gamble that future generations will undoubtedly pay the price for. So, there you have it. Trump's environmental legacy, written in a language of deregulation, denial, and a healthy dose of self-interest. His actions on the environment were a masterclass in short-sightedness, a testament to the power of corporate interests, and a stark reminder that the fight for a healthy planet is far from over. But hey, at least we got a few good tweets out of it, right? Because in the end, that's all that really matters, right? Alright, strap yourselves in because we're diving headfirst into the wonderful world of international trade agreements, thanks to Trump's executive order. You see, Trump campaigned on this America First platform, which sounds lovely in theory. Who doesn't love America, right? But the way he went about it, well, it's like trying to make a souffle with a jackhammer. This executive order was basically Trump saying see you later to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Now, the TPP was this massive trade deal between 12 countries. And it was years in the making. Think of it like a carefully crafted wedding cake, with each layer representing a different aspect of trade. Then Trump comes along with a chainsaw, yells, "Nobody likes fruitcake," and takes the whole thing down. The problem is, dismantling trade agreements isn't as simple as it sounds. Now, the TPP wasn't without its critics. Some argued it favored big corporations, and they weren't entirely wrong, but it also had the potential to boost the global economy and strengthen ties with important allies in the Pacific Rim. Trump's decision to pull out? It sent shockwaves through the international community. It was like showing up to a potluck, taking a giant bite out of someone's prize-winning casserole, and then just walking away without saying a word. And the irony is, China, the country Trump seemed most concerned about, wasn't even part of the TPP. It was like going to a Taylor Swift concert just to yell about how much you hate Kanye West, completely missing the point and ruining the experience for everyone else. This move left a void in the Asia-Pacific region, one that China was more than happy to fill. They swooped in with their own trade deals, further cementing their influence in the region. So much for America First, huh? More like America somewhere in the back, maybe? So, who felt the immediate impact of this executive order? Well, American businesses for one. Imagine you're a farmer in Iowa and you've just spent the last year cultivating a bumper crop of soybeans, all set to ship them off to Japan thanks to the TPP. Then, bam! Trump pulls the rug out from under you, leaving you with a warehouse full of soybeans and a whole lot of uncertainty. It wasn't just agriculture either. Manufacturing, tech, you name it, they all felt the ripple effects. Remember that trade war we talked about earlier? Yeah, this executive order made that a whole lot more likely. And nobody wins in a trade war. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. But the impact of this executive order extended far beyond American shores. The TPP was more than just a trade deal. It was a strategic alliance. It was meant to counter China's growing influence in the region and strengthen ties between the United States and its allies. By pulling out, Trump essentially handed China a golden opportunity on a silver platter. This move signaled to the world that the United States was turning inward, becoming less reliable on the global stage. It's like that friend who keeps canceling plans at the last minute. Eventually people just stop inviting you. The long-term consequences of this executive order are still unfolding, but one thing is clear. Trump's America First approach to trade has had a profound impact on the global economy. Whether those impacts are positive or negative is a matter of debate, but there's no denying that Trump's actions shook things up. It's like that moment you realize the Earth isn't flat. It changes your whole perspective. So where do we go from here? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One thing is for sure, navigating the complex world of international trade requires a delicate touch, something this executive order sorely lacked. It's like trying to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. You might get the job done, but it's not going to be pretty. Okay, folks, buckle up because we're about to delve into the world of national security, and as you might expect with a Trump executive order, things are about to get messy. We're talking about the infamous travel ban, a term that's become synonymous with chaos, confusion, and a good dose of legal challenges. Now, the Trump administration preferred the term extreme vetting, which sounds like something you'd do to a potential roommate who claims to be a professional cuddler. But in reality, this executive order was far from cuddly. It restricted travel from several Muslim-majority countries, citing national security concerns. The problem was, the order was so poorly written, so full of loopholes and contradictions, that it seemed like it was drafted on the back of a cocktail napkin. And let's not forget the way it was rolled out, with all the grace and subtlety of a bull in a china shop. People were detained at airports, families were separated, and the world watched in disbelief. Imagine this. You've saved up for months for a trip to see your family. You've got your visa, your bags are packed, and you're ready to go. Then bam, you get to the airport only to be told you're not allowed to enter the country. That's the reality many people faced in the wake of this executive order. It was chaos. Airports became battlegrounds with lawyers working pro bono alongside taxi drivers offering free rides to those stranded by the ban. The ACLU called it unconstitutional, and even some Republicans voiced their concerns. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car was the American justice system, and everyone in the vehicle was screaming. Unsurprisingly, this executive order faced immediate legal challenges. Lawsuits were filed, judges issued stays, and the whole thing became a legal tug-of-war. It was like watching a tennis match played with the Constitution as the ball. The Trump administration tried to defend the order, claiming it was necessary to protect national security. But the courts weren't convinced. They saw it for what it was, a thinly veiled attempt to ban Muslims from entering the country. This executive order wasn't just bad policy, it was a PR nightmare. It sent a message to the world that America was closed for business, that we were turning our backs on those fleeing violence and persecution. It was like putting up a giant go-away sign on the Statue of Liberty. Allies were alienated, enemies were emboldened, and America's reputation as a beacon of freedom and opportunity took a serious hit. But the true cost of this executive order wasn't measured in legal fees or diplomatic blunders, it was measured in human lives. Families were torn apart, dreams were shattered, and lives were put on hold. It was a stark reminder that behind every policy decision, there are real people whose lives are affected. The travel ban may be gone, but its legacy lives on. It's a legacy of fear, uncertainty, and a deep sense of unease. It's a reminder that even in the land of the free, freedom is a fragile thing, something that can be taken away with the stroke of a pen. Well, folks, there you have it. A whirlwind tour of Donald Trump's first-day executive orders. We've seen how these orders, often hastily crafted and recklessly implemented, sent shockwaves through the country and the world. From healthcare to immigration, trade to national security, these executive actions left no shortage of chaos and confusion in their wake. We've seen how they impacted businesses, families, and individuals, often with devastating consequences. But most importantly, we've seen how these orders tested the very fabric of American democracy, pushing the boundaries of executive power and raising fundamental questions about the rule of law. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more in-depth analyses. And be sure to let us know in the comments which executive order you think had the most significant impact.